Hey everyone, Hatter here, finally back with a new overview of our dynamic Dungeons & Dragons character sheet. This should be very familiar to you if you've been following the series so far. This should all look the same as what we've been working on for very many months ago. But if you look under the hood, you will see so much more functionality and so many more new features that we've added to the sheet that we're going to go through today. Stick with me because this is going to be a long video, but hopefully it will be well worth it once you see all of the power that we've added to this character sheet. And I will add some timestamps in there so that you can see specifically where to go to if you need to focus on a particular part of this, because we're going to be working in HTML, we're going to be working in JavaScript, and we are linking this character sheet to Google Docs or Google Sheets for that matter to store and load our character data. So before we hop into the nuts and bolts of how all of this works, I just want to show off some of these features, show off what we've added, and if it's right for you, then stick around. If not, we'll hop back into the old version of the sheet. So first, you'll see that I've added a player and character input box over here on the left column above level. Now, if you notice when I hover over the player input, it is a text input, so you can put something in there, but it actually is a drop-down as well. And you see that it populates a few names. Everything above the line, if you can see it here, is actually something that is stored in our database. Everything below that is just the browser's autocomplete. So, some testing, I added another name. So let's say, for instance, we select my name, Steven. Then you go down to character, and all of a sudden, the character text input has become a drop-down as well. And again, everything above the line here is an existing character in our sheet. So if we select Tobias, you see that our sheet has populated with some values from our database. Now, where this is pulling from is we're using PapaParse, which is a JavaScript framework, in order to pull data from our Dungeons & Dragons character sheet, or character spreadsheet, I should say, rather, which we're basically using as a database to store all of our character values. So if we come back into here and let's say, we deal some damage, we'll take 5 points of damage, but then the dungeon master says, hey, let's retcon that. I didn't roll that correctly or something like that. Well, what you can do is this data is not stored automatically. You can click load data and it will pull the most recent update to the spreadsheet. I wanted to make that functionality so that nothing was auto-saved, because, so many other platforms out there, once you've entered something, then the old values are gone. And so if you get really deep into the weeds and you end up, changing a lot of things about your character, you can always click that load data button and everything will go back to the last saved version. Now, as you can see, everything else is updating the way we are used to. If you go up in your level, your proficiency bonus will update, all of that good stuff. Now, let's go ahead and click Save Data. We've gone from level 1 to level 6. A little bit of a stretch there, but let's give it a shot. We click Save Data, and what happens is our character, Tobias, under my name, Steven, has gone from level 1 to level 6, and we can save all of these data, all of these different values through the method of a form submission. Now, let's say we wanted to create a new character. Let's go ahead and get rid of Tobias here. Let's create a new character called Gunther. And he's going to be a level 10. Let's make him stupidly strong, like 27 strength, and we'll make sure that he's super dumb to make up for that. We'll hit LongRest to make sure that he's got all of his hit points and everything. Let's change up his armor to, maybe breastplate armor. The proficiency bonus has already been updated. Let's go ahead and add in a few other skill proficiencies. This is all just for example, as you guys know. And what we're going to do is go into here and hit Save Data. Obviously, nothing happens here, but behind the scenes, we've actually added a new row to our character database with my name, Steven, and the character's name and all of their stats saved, as well as all of their skill proficiencies. How cool is that? So if you like all of that, we are going to go into the nuts and bolts of how to make all of that work. So first of all, you might be asking, why are we using Google Sheets as our save and load platform? Well, there's a few reasons for that. For one, it is free for everyone to use. You don't have to go out and buy web hosting. You don't have to set up a website in order to save and load things. If you want to do that, you can, but I wanted to make this tutorial as accessible to everyone as possible. Additionally, it is universal, which means everyone's going to have the same instructions and the same access. If I were to build this on my web hosting, if you were, say, on Bluehost or on HostGator or something like that, the protocol for accessing your database might be different, and therefore, this tutorial would be no good to you. And finally, this is kind of important to me, is data ownership. See, if I were to set this up on my own website and allow you guys to post characters to my own database or something like that, then you would have no way of accessing that database and getting your data back. This way, if I were to set something up on Gundam5e.com, for instance, you could link your own Google Sheet and you would have access to your own data. I wouldn't be able to touch it, but it would just be loaded by the scripts on the site, as you're going to see in the HTML and JavaScript that we are using today. And this actually also allows us to make edits in our sheet view as well. So let's say, for instance, we wanted to drop our strength down to 15, then we would hop over here, and if we hit load data, it still is pulling from the old version of the sheet. So we're going to hit refresh, and we'll select Stephen, and in characters, we have Gunther has been added to the list now here. And now it is pulling 15 instead of 27. So you actually have the ability to edit either in the sheet view or in the spreadsheet view. Now, as always, we are going to be working in CodePen just so that I can show things off, and the link to the pen is going to be in the description below. And again, I will be putting timestamps in for each section that we're going to be covering. Like I said, this is going to be a long one, but stick with me because it is worth it. Let's hop into our editor view. All right, we're going to shrink our preview here, and then I'm just going to go through and cover all of the changes that we've made to the character sheet HTML. If you have already made changes or optimizations, then you can go ahead and just copy your own and paste it in, and we can just add the various attributes and things that you're going to need in order to trigger the scripts to work. The added benefit of this particular tutorial is you're not going to have to watch me type anything and make a bunch of horrible typos. I'm just going to go through line by line and cover what is there. So first, we've got our little break tag. All that does is add a little bit of space between the top of the page and our row. It's not entirely necessary. You don't need to add it if you don't want to. I just did it so that this particular CodePen looks pretty. Next, and this isn't necessary for CodePen, but it is going to be necessary if you copy this HTML somewhere else, is we are going to be linking to our Bootstrap style sheet. That is what we've been using in order to get our nice, clean, and pretty formatting. So what you're going to do is create a link tag here and set it up as an REL style sheet and a H reference of the link to your bootstrap.css. Similarly, we are going to create an open and close script tag, and we are going to be pulling in PapaParse.js, which is a JavaScript framework that allows us to parse data out of Google Spreadsheets, and that is where the meat of our load function comes from. Next, we're going to open up our container. All that does is set our maximum width for the window so that we're not stretching from end to end and taking up the full width of the page. Now, this part's important. We are going to open up a form tag, and that we are going to have to give it a name and an ID property. Make sure that you have these noted somewhere so that you can reference them later in our JavaScript. This is going to be important for our save function later. They can be the same thing if you want them to be, just as long as you remember which one's which and what it is called. Next, we're going to open up our row, which, if you remember how we set up Bootstrap before, basically this entire page is just one row with 3 columns. And so every row and column tag that you open is going to set up, you can basically build out a grid. But in this particular case, we just have one row that is the entire page and 3 columns that cover each of the columns. If you wanted to make this a multi-page character sheet, then what you might want to do is create a second row for your second page. Now that we've got our row column open, or our row div open, sorry for that, we are going to open up a column, and that's column 4. Remember that Bootstrap operates in units of 12, so if we are 12 units across, 4 is 1/3 of that, and we are making 1/3 with columns, so column 4. We've got our header for player. That's pretty self-explanatory. Next, we have an input field. Now, I don't have a designated type of input, but obviously this is a text input. You know, we could add any name we wanted to. We could say Bruce or Jennifer. So we can input whatever we want into that. And where we get the drop-down value is actually in the data list line just below it. So what you want to do is, obviously we need a name for this. So make sure that you store the input name as something that you're going to remember. This is for the load or the save function later. So you need to have a name. Everything that we want to save to the database has to have a name attribute. So make sure you get a name attribute to every input that you want to save to the sheet, and note the name. Make sure that it's something easy that you can come back to. Obviously, we have our ID. This is going to be important for calling functions when we want to do something based on the contents of this. So say, for instance, we were going to load a player, which obviously we call our function load player, and I'll show you the JavaScript on this later, but you know, we need to read the value of this input, and that's where the ID comes from, because we're going to call it by its ID. And finally, we have our list attribute. What this does is it calls all of the values, all of these auto-populate values in the dropdown come from the data list below. Now, as you can see, the data list below has the ID of players, list players. That's how you link these guys together, but there's nothing in there. Well, that's where our PapaParse over in JavaScript, we are going to use JavaScript to populate this list so that we can fill our dropdown with existing players. Added a couple break tags just to create some space between player and character. Then we've got our character, obviously. Similarly, player and character are set up almost identically. We have a name attribute that is going to be our character name. We use that for the save function. The ID, which is how we are going to load the character, which, you know, when this field changes on change, we are going to load a new character. And what that does is, let's go ahead and add that in. So, you know, as you know, if we were to select a character, it populates the values. It uses that ID to get the value of that text field. Finally, you've got your list, which is linked to the data list that immediately follows. Data list is invisible. Obviously, you can't see that there. And we are going to use JavaScript to actually populate that list. Make sure that the data list ID matches the list tag in your input. And that's how you get that neat effect of having a text field that also has a dropdown. We add a couple more break tags to create some more space between character and level. Obviously, header to level. Nothing fancy there. Next, we have our level input. Now, this one, we have name level. That's important for the save, as I mentioned. And we have an attribute of type number that gives us the little up-down arrows in HTML. We need to make sure to give it an ID that we're going to remember. And again, you know, the ID and name can match. They don't have to, but they can. So if it makes it easier for you to remember, you can make them the same thing. But remember that they are important, and you're going to remember to reference them later. In this particular case, since we're playing Dungeons and Dragons and your minimum level is 1, your maximum level is 20, we have that already set up. And then we have a default value of 1. The reason we do that is because if we load a character or we create a new character and we don't have something already in there, there are several different functions that are called that require you to have a player level. And so we need there to be a placeholder value in place when we call that function. And then when level changes, we want to call this SetProficiencyBonus script. What that does is when you hit certain levels, obviously your proficiency bonus over here will change. When we hit level 5, it turns to 3. When we hit level 9, it turns to 4, etc., etc. All right, we add a couple more breaks, and then ability scores. Header 2, ability scores. Nothing fancy there. Then we open up a table. That is where we've stored all of our data in here, where we've got our abilities, our ability scores, and our ability modifiers. Nothing in here has changed in particular from our previous videos, but what we do want to make sure we have is in all of our inputs for the ability scores, we need to have that name attribute added. And remember to make it something that you can remember, obviously str, dex, con, etc. Those are going to be very easy for us to call back later. And we've got our on change. We want to update our modifiers. So, that's what allows our modifier to update when we move up and down on the scores. Additionally, you want to make sure that all of your ability scores have a default placeholder value. You don't have to do this, but it scares people sometimes when you have a 0 score and you come in here and you have a -5 mod and you're like, what? But I'm not -5. So having a placeholder of 10 makes it so that all of your modifiers are 0 and people don't freak out. And it's basically just copy and pasted for each ability score and modifier. We have a table cell first, so that's the TD, and then we have an input for the ability score, which is here, and then we have an input for the ability modifier, which follows. Finally, once we get to the end of the table, we are going to have a couple of buttons. Now, I don't use the button element, so I just simply call them divs, but I give them a class of button/button secondary. Now, you can, if you want to, change this. Bootstrap has some built-in button stylings. So for instance, we can change it to button success, and that changes it to a green button. And then maybe, we can change the load button to button info, and that changes it to a blue button. So, just some neat little tricks you can do to make your sheet look a particular way. And that is when we are going to close that column and open up a new one. Oh, whoa. Went out of control there. So that's when we close this column and we're going to open up a new one, div class column 4, and that is going to open up this column for us. Now, nothing here has changed. All of this stuff still functions the same way it's supposed to. We've got our header here for armor, and that has, that's just the text for armor. We have our header for equipped armor. That's this text here. And then we have a select, and when that select is changed, we call the update armor class function. And that's where we get all of this. And if you followed the previous tutorials, you know that we built in some logic that allows you to limit the options here based on the strength score of the player. All of that stuff is still the same, so you don't have to go and tweak that. I may have changed some of the function names to be uppercase. That's just because I do things uppercase now. Deal with it. You can call what, as long as the function is correct between what you call in the HTML and what is in the JavaScript. That is the important part. Now remember, armor is going to be one of those things you want a name value added to, and that is going to make sure that you push that data to the spreadsheet when you're ready. And in our list of options here, we have the opt groups, which, as you can see, value light armor, label light armor. That is what creates these disabled options in the drop-down list that allow you to divide your armors into light armor, medium armor, and heavy armor options. Now, once we get down here, we're going to have our additional header for equipped shield. Again, we didn't do anything fancy here. We did merge the update armor class function, and like I said, we're going to touch on that in the JavaScript. But what used to be two different functions, which we would update armor and then update shield, now we just changed it to update armor class, and that way we can do all of our calculations in one go instead of having to worry about doing two different scripts. It's all just handled as armor and shield together. And we have a header for our armor class down here and an input that has a placeholder 0. You don't necessarily need this to be an input, but in case you have some bonus AC or something that you want to calculate, it's nice to be able to change that manually if you want to. Just bear in mind that if you change it manually and then you change something up here, your calculations are going to overwrite anything that you've done. So that might be a feature request that we talk about later, is, having a manual override, checkbox or something like that. And then down here, we have our hit points manager. So header to hit points. We have our HP, which is a little span. That's what this guy is. And then we have a text input, which is our current HP. Remember that we added a name attribute to that. That is what's going to get saved when we save the data to the spreadsheet. And that is this input here. And then we have that little slash in between, and we have our max HP input. That is this input here where we can set our max HP. Remember that you want both of these so that, say for instance, you wanted to save a game mid-game, you can save that you are at 5 out of 10 HP. That way, you don't come back to it and you're already max health again. Below that, we have our damage and heal modifiers. So in here, we've got our span. It is classed as a button. It's class button danger, and that's what gives us that beautiful red button, but it's not a button element. It's a span, and that's what keeps it in line. So we have our input type in the middle, which is a number type, as you know. Now, none of this stuff needs to be, we don't have to add name attributes. We don't have to add ID attributes to these things, except for the actual HP modifier, because we call that in script. But, we're not going to save this stuff to the character sheet database, obviously. Similarly, once we have the damage button on the left, we have a heal button on the right. We have that is a span that has the button/button success classes applied to it, and that's what gives us that pretty green button. So that way we know whether we're damaging or healing. Now you can set this to a negative. We probably don't want to. If we were to say damage for -5, it's actually going to heal. So, you always want this to be a positive, and we can damage it, we can heal it. These buttons are just going to pull the raw value of what's in this input. So it's a little easier to manage that, as opposed to saying like, oh, you take 20 points of damage, then you have to come in here and say -20 and, heal for -20. That seems kind of silly. So I like having two buttons here so that we have a damage button and a heal button. If you so wanted to, you can add a min attribute to this, and that would set it up so that when this reloads, you can no longer go below 0. So after that, we have a span that covers our hit dice. That's what keeps everything in line here. So we have a span for text, which is the hit dice. That's this text right here. And then right after that, we have an input that is name hit dice. Again, we're adding in that attribute for the name. Then we've got some class stylings going on here. ID hit dice. We use that for when we are calculating various things in JavaScript. So remember, it has to have a name and ID, and they can be the same, but they don't have to be. We have our type, which is number. That allows us to go up and down. And then we have a little slash here, right? And that's what creates this little slash. And we have a second span that is the D. That's your D right here. So that just is supposed to represent dice. So you have 1 die 4 or, 1 die 8, whatever the case may be. Down here is where we have our select. And each of the values is one of those dice steps. So remember, we got to have a name attribute and an ID attribute for that select input. And then each of the options just goes through one of the dice steps, and that's what populates our dropdown. Now, these things you do want to save. Like I said, you want to know what your character's hit die is, and you want to know how many hit dice they have left in case you've spent some during a short rest, for instance, right? So we do want those to have name attributes. That's what allows us to save them to our Google Sheet. All right, now below that, we have our short rest and long rest divs. Remember, we're not using the button element type, but we are adding the class button info and class button success in order to get the button stylings. The reason we don't want to use the button element type is that there's certain event listeners that are already built in that will actually prevent us from doing this on-click method that's going to call our own JavaScript. It's going to be looking for a submit type function, which we don't want to do. So remember, every time you add a button, make it a div or make it a span, but don't make it an actual button, and then just add the button styling to it, and that's how you get the look of the button. And like I said, we've got our on-click functions, which are ShortRest and LongRest. That stuff is the same. We've got an ID here for ShortRest, and the reason I've done that is because later I'm going to implement a function that prevents us from being able to click the ShortRest button if you are at 0, but I have not done that yet. All right, and here is where we close up that column. We have nothing left in that column, and we're going to open up our final column 4, which starts off with our proficiency bonus. So below that opened column, we have our header for proficiency bonus. That's what this is. And then we add a little break so that we have some space between that and the actual input, which is your proficiency bonus. Now, something I haven't mentioned just yet, but this is going to come up later. You notice that I did not add a name attribute to the proficiency bonus. The reason I didn't do that is because it actually reduces the amount of data that we need to call from the spreadsheet. And I'll show you what I mean about that later once we get into the saving and loading function. But a lot of these values are actually calculated on the sheet, and we don't have to store them to the database because they're going to be auto-populated once we load the sheet. So for instance, we save all of our ability scores, but we don't save the modifiers because the modifiers are already going to have to load once the ability scores are populated. And like I said, I'll show you what I mean by that later, but just for now, bear in mind that anything you don't want to save to the sheet, just don't give it a name attribute, and you're good. Next, after that, we go into our skills, which that header just creates the skills header. And below that, we start a table. That's what gives us the formatting over here, where we've got our 3-column table. And each table row consists of 3 cells, which, this is a table row, and each one of these is a cell. We've got the checkbox, we've got the name of our skill, and then we've got the skill value. So we've got, here is the checkbox, which contains most of our functionality. Here is the name, is the acrobatics, obviously. And then finally, the third cell is the number that we have to give an ID to. And that's how we are going to update it in script. Now remember, we are going to have to give the checkboxes a name attribute because we're going to save the proficiency to the sheet, but we're not going to necessarily save the actual skill number to our spreadsheet. The reason is we only need to know whether the character is proficient or not in order to populate the value based on their ability scores, their modifiers, and their level. So again, it's one of those values that you don't need to save to the database. It reduces the amount of data that you have to load every time you load a new sheet, and everything is done on the sheet anyway when we create a new character. So we might as well reduce the amount of code that we implement here, right? And then remember, on change, we want to call that SetSkills function again, and that's what's going to update our skill proficiencies, based on whether or not the box is checked. And again, we're going to go through that for each skill. So remember, each skill is going to have its own row. Each skill is going to have its own proficiency checkbox with a name, with a type of checkbox, an ID, and on change, it has to set skills. Now, what that does is it's actually going to set all of the skills no matter which one you check. So just bear that in mind as well, that we're calling the function for everything instead of calling individual functions for each one, like set athletics, set deception. We just call all of them at once. And then we have a column for our name and then a column for the actual score value. All the way down for each skill, all 18 of them. And then we close out our table, close out our div, and at the end, make sure you close your form. Because remember, we opened up that form at the beginning. That is how our SaveData function works. So now we're going to take a look at our JavaScript and take a look at what we are doing. Obviously, we have a lot of different methods here that we're calling, and I'm going to walk through each one of them with you and show you what they do, why we call them, when we call them, and what data is populated based on those data calls. So first up, we're going to set a global variable called characterData, and we're going to set it equal to these open and close brackets. The reason we're doing that is because it sets up this characterData variable as an array. For those of you that are unfamiliar with programming, an array is actually a series of variables. So whereas, we could set it as a simple variable such as 1, or we could set it to a name like, say, Stephen, or we can set it to an array, which is a number of different things, which technically, if we were to, populate this, it would be like character name Gunther, level 3. I would put that in a string. So it'd be like character name Gunther, level 3, proficiency bonus 2, and basically everything is a comma separated value in there. But we are going to leave it empty because we are actually going to populate it using our LoadCharacter script. Okay, up next we have our LoadSheet function here. This method is what we use to populate all of our sheet data. And if you scroll down to the bottom here is when we set up our window on load equals LoadSheet. This is what happens is that when the entire page is loaded, we want to call that function. So it's going to go window.onload equals LoadSheet. And that is what calls this LoadSheet function. This is where the rubber meets the road on the loading data from the spreadsheet. So let's dive into what PapaParse is doing here and how we fetch this data to populate our sheet with. First, we're going to set up a variable file, and then it's going to be in a link here. We have the link to our Google Sheet. Now, if you've watched any of the other videos I've done talking about PapaParse and what you can do using PapaParse, you know this part already. But basically, what you're going to want to do is create a Google Sheet, like so. We've got our Google Spreadsheet, and then you're going to go to File and Share. And instead of doing Share with others, you're going to click Publish to Web. Now, as you can see, we're already publishing here, but if there wasn't anything publishing already, then it would just kind of look like this. But we are publishing our character sheet data. And what we want to do is we want to get a link to the CSV version of this spreadsheet. So what you're going to do is select characters. And from here, instead of web page, you want to select CSV. And then the link that's generated here, we're going to copy that. So what we want to do is get that link and we paste it in right here. I use double quotes, but it is the exact same link that I just copied. It just has the document data and the publishing type, which here it's, pub ? We use the sheet ID of 0, which means it's the first page of it. And we do output type CSV. That is what allows us to parse the data. Remember, we called that PapaParse external framework. So that is what gives us this ability to say papa.parse, and that calls this particular function where we've got our file URL, and then we've got some parameters here. The parameters, we're going to set download to true, and we're going to set header to true. What that means is that, we are downloading the data from the sheet, and then we are populating the header values using the first row of data. So that means that all of our actual data starts in row 2, not row 1. That's all that means. And then complete, basically what that does is when the file is done downloading, after it's complete, we're going to call a function. This function, we are going to pass the results of that data into some other functions that we're going to call inside of that complete function, right? So what we want to do is we want to take our global variable of character data, that's this one up here, and we're going to set that equal to our results.data. What that does is it's going to make it so that all of the data that we've gotten out of our spreadsheet, we can now call from any other function here, and we don't have to call this load function every single time. We load it once into the character data array, and then we can call it again from any other one of these functions without having to do this part of the script again. And then from there, we're going to call another function, which is called PopulateData, as you can see down below. I'm going to cover that just a moment. And what we're going to do is pass the variable that we just created, or well, the variable that we just set, right? We just set character data. We want to pass the character data through our PopulateData function. So this is the most powerful piece of the load data function, because this is the script, and using PapaParse as the framework where we do that, it's as simple as getting a link to your spreadsheet, pasting that link into this file variable, and then papa.parse the file. And that's what gives us our results and fills our character data variable. And then once that's done, we want to populate it. So once we've got our data in an array that we can use, we're going to populate it. So we're going to say var player list. We're going to set up some players here. And then we're going to set up another array. It's unique players. And we're going to set that equal to the open brackets because we're going to have an array. And then we're going to do a little for loop. Now what we're going to do is say for var equals I. If you've followed any of my other tutorials, you know that this is one of the most powerful functions that we use, which is the for loop, where we go through the length of data that we have, right? So we set a random variable. It doesn't have to be I, it can be any letter, but I is just easy. So var I equal to 0, semicolon, as long as I is less than the length of our data, which we established as a parameter that we're passing through. Technically, all this data is equal to character data up here. That's all it is. So as long as I is less than the length of our data, we're going to do this. And then once that's done, we are going to increment I by 1. And so it's going to go through each row as long as there's data still to go. Now, for each row, if the unique players does not include, if we didn't have the exclamation point there, it would say if unique players includes, etc. But by putting the exclamation there, we're setting it to false. So if unique players dot, basically this means does not include data I. And so what data I means is we're calling that row from the data. So if the row is 0, it's data 0. If it's 1, it's data 1, data 2, data 3, etc. And then we can actually use the parameters from our sheet. So you notice I said player name, data I.player name. That matches the header value of our sheet. That's one of the beautiful things about PapaParse. And, like in the load sheet function right here, where we said header true, that allows us to, instead of calling things by number and by index, we can actually use the header values in order to call specific data. So we say for each row, we have a player name, which is, each row, we've got a player name, Steven, Adam, Steven. If the unique players array doesn't have that player name in it yet, then what we're going to do is we're actually going to add the player name to our unique players array. And then we're going to say player list, and we're going to create a little HTML value here, right? So what we're going to say is player list plus equals. That means it's going to add this value to our player list without deleting anything that already exists there. And we're going to put a quote option and a quote close option. And on the inside, we're going to say data I.player name. So what we're doing is if the player name does not already exist in unique players, then we're going to add it to the unique players, and we're going to add it to the player list surrounded by this option tag. Now you might be wondering, why are we doing the option tag? Because what we are doing is we're actually populating that player list that I mentioned earlier in the script, this little dropdown. We are populating that data list right here. Data list players. What we're doing is we're going to say document.getElementById players. That's this one. And then we're going to say the inner HTML of that. So the inner value of that data list is going to be equal to player list, which is a bunch of options with the player names in it. Now, the reason we add this if statement in there is so that we can filter out any duplicates. As you can see, we've got Steven exists 3 times and Adam exists twice. So we wouldn't want it to be, drop down Steven, Steven, Adam, Adam, Steven, right? So we just filter it out and say only one Steven and only one Adam. Pretty simple, right? So then after we've populated that list, we're going to call the load player function. And that is what populates our character list. So let's hop into that function, which is going to look extremely similar to what we've already got. And we are going to say our selected player, which is, we set up a variable called selected player, and we set it equal to the document.getElementID player select. That's this one, the input value. And then we've got a variable called player characters. We just set that up. We don't do anything with it just yet. And we're going to set up another for loop for I equals 0, semicolon, as long as I is less than the characterData dot length. So, as long as it's less than the total number of characters in the sheet. And then, we're going to increment each time we run this for loop. We'll say if characterData and that row, I, player name, equals selected player. So we've got our selected player is Steven. So if the characterData.player name, which is over here, so if it is Steven, we're going to load one of these characters. We are going to do the same thing we did in PopulateData, which is say player characters plus equals, add our option tags, and we're going to add the character names for each character that we've got. So in the case of Steven, we would be adding Tobias, Ethan, and Gunther. And then we're going to get document.getElementById characters. That is our data list characters over here in the HTML. And we're going to set that inner HTML equal to the array player characters, which we have just populated with all of our characters as options. So pretty cool, right? And then we are going to call LoadCharacter once we have loaded our player. Now, LoadCharacter is really just a placeholder, right? Because all it does is it calls several other functions, and this we can actually call from other HTML. So for instance, what we have is in our load data button, all we do is we call the LoadCharacter method. So down here in this button where we've got load data, we just run through all of the things that we want to happen when we load our character. We want to set our level, we want to update our ability scores, we want to update our skill proficiencies, our HP, our hit dice, we want to load any gear, that's our shield and our armor, and then finally we want to update our armor class based on the gear that we have loaded. So basically it's just a method that calls other methods. And if you need to add anything else to this, such as adding weapons or something like that, basically anything you want to do when you load the character at the start of the game, you want to add into this. And that way you can call it both from this button and you can call it from the load player at the end once you've populated all of your character values. All right, now that we've covered that, let's shrink it back up. So let's go through each of the methods that we're calling from within the LoadCharacter function. First, we have SetLevel. So in our SetLevel function, we're going to say variable selected character, and we're going to go document.getElementById character select. That is the one up here. So we are going to get this text value and set it equal to a variable, right? And then again, we're going to go through that for loop. We're going to say for var equals 0, semicolon, as long as I is less than our character data length. We're going to cycle through them. And then we're going to say if our character data dot character name, so if the row is the same as our selected character over here, then we are going to get document.getElementById player level and set the value equal to that row's level. So what we're doing is we're basically going through every row, and once we hit the match, so let's say for instance, we've got Steven, we're going to set our character to Ethan. What we're doing is we're going through each row, and it's like, okay, is the character name Tobias? No, then we're not going to update the level. Is the character name Ethan? Yes. Then we're going to set the level equal to 3. And as you can see, that's what we're doing here. Now, the important thing you want to do is once we have completed that step, we can set our proficiency bonus, which, that would be called if we were to change level, right? It's the same function, but we can call it from different places, right? And that's really the power of having all of these different methods, is that we can call them whenever we need them and not have to worry about, upsetting different functions and calling different things that we don't want to be called. So the set proficiency bonus function can be called from the set level, so when we load our character, or it can be called when we change our level. So that's the on change in our HTML. And then this is important. We want to hit return, which stops the for loop, right? Because we don't want to keep going through all of our data once we've found a match. So once we've hit our match, we don't even look at these three. We have set proficiency bonus. Now that one is going to come before UpdateAbilityScores, and the only reason it comes before UpdateAbilityScores is because we're actually calling it from SetLevel. You can organize these however you want. It doesn't really matter because you're calling them in different places. I've just organized them in this way so that we can go through them. Basically, as we're calling them, I want to tell you what we're doing each time we call one. So set proficiency bonus is very simple. It actually doesn't do anything with our character data, from the spreadsheet. All we're doing is we set our variable of level equal to document.getElementById player level. That's this one down here. And then we just do a little simple equation, is the document.getElementById proficiency bonus. We're going to set the value of that. So the inner value here equal to math.floor, which means rounded down. And then inside parentheses, we're going to do a little equation. And if there's any, remainder, we're going to round down from there. And we're going to say 2 plus our player level minus 1. So that means, level 3 minus 1, so down to 2, divided by 4. And that is the formula for how you would calculate proficiency bonus based on level. You could do it. Previous editions of this character sheet, we actually calculated this out manually. We said if your player level is 5, set proficiency bonus to 3. This does all of that in one line of code. So it's a lot more efficient. And it's, just a really basic little arithmetic there. And again, we set proficiency bonus. This function is called both when we load our level from the character sheet, or from the character database, I should say, or when we change the level in our sheet. Moving on, we have UpdateAbilityScores, which when we load our character, we update our ability scores. And I think that's the only time that we actually call it. There really wouldn't be another reason to call it, honestly. And so what we're going to do is, again, we set our selected character variable equal to document.getElementById character select. So in this case, that's going to be Ethan.value. And then we go through our for loop again. So as long as we have rows in our character spreadsheet, we are going to check if the character name from the spreadsheet equals the selected character on our character sheet, then we are going to set our strength score value equal to our character value .str, right? So that's basically, we go through our list. We say if character name is Ethan, then we set our strength score equal to the str, then our dex value to the dex, and so on and so forth through each of our ability scores. That's what each line of these does, obviously. So we've got strength, dex, con, int, whiz, and cha. So all we're doing is just taking those HTML values and changing them to what we have in the spreadsheet. Once we've done that, we can call our UpdateModifiers function, and then we return, because remember, we want to get out of that for loop. We don't want to keep processing data. And this just keeps it from processing data in the background, right? It just makes our sheet more efficient because we're not going to process data once we've found a match. We don't need it to go through and read Henkin's ability scores because we already found our match, which was Ethan. And then that is that. All we do is we load our ability scores in. And again, I mentioned earlier that we don't store our modifiers in the spreadsheet. We don't have to, because we're already going to calculate modifiers when we change our ability scores. So we might as well call the UpdateModifiers function when we load our ability scores from the sheet. So that way we don't have to store more data on the spreadsheet. We can just calculate our ability modifiers once we have our scores populated from the database. And so this is the same as it was before. We take our strength score value, which is a variable, strength score equals document.getElement by ID strength score dot value, and then we are going to do a little math equation with it. We're going to say our document.getElement by ID modifier value is equal to math floor. So that means rounded down. We take our strength score minus 10. So we would take 15 minus 10 makes it 5, and then divide it by 2. But as you know, 5 divided by 2 is 2.5. So then we round down. So instead of being 2.5 in the modifier, it becomes 2. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. It's just basic arithmetic, right? And then once we have calculated all of our modifiers, what do we want to do? Well, we're going to call a couple of other functions. We're going to call our SetSkills. So that's going to mean we recalculate our skills based on our ability modifiers. So for instance, you might look at acrobatics up here, right? We have 1 acrobatics. Well, we only have 1 dexterity modifier. So if we were to bump that up, we would want the skill acrobatics to reflect our change over here. Now we're going to get into that function a little bit later down the pipeline. I just wanted to tell you why we're calling it from the update modifiers function. Similarly, we're going to update our armor class again, because armor class uses your dexterity in its calculation. So obviously armor class is 16 up there. What if we dropped our dexterity? You see how our armor class drops? That's because we want to update it whenever we update our modifiers. And we can call update modifiers from a lot of different places. That allows us to update our skills and our armor class whenever our modifiers are changed. All right, so moving on to update skill proficiency, we're going to do the same thing we've been doing every time we call data from our spreadsheet. We're going to set our variable of selected character equal to the character select value. That's the value over here. This is why it's important to keep all of your IDs in check and all of your field names memorable so that you can call them whenever you need them. And we're going to go through our for loop. As always, we're going to go through our characterData.length. So every row of our spreadsheet, we're going to compare the character name column of our spreadsheet equal to our selected character. And if we find that we have a match, what we're going to do is we're actually just going to set the checked value of our skill proficiency, document.getElement by ID acroprof, which is the ID of our acrobatics proficiency, as you can see over here in the HTML. And we're going to actually call another function here, because there's something that we need to discuss when it comes to the way that Google Sheets processes data. You see, when we have a Boolean in Google Sheets over here, all of these are set up as checkboxes, which you can actually just go in here and say insert checkbox, right? And that's what turns one of these cells into a checkbox. You can select all of them and do it that way. Now, the downside of having these checkboxes is, well, I mean, the positive is that it's very easy on the eyes, right? You can see what's positive and what's negative quite easily when you're looking at the spreadsheet view. Unfortunately, when this data is parsed by PapaParse, it comes out as a true or false, but it comes out as this, which is true or false in all caps, right? We don't want that, because what happens is the checked attribute of this element, well, and in this case, it needs to be a Boolean, right? And the Boolean needs to be in all lowercase. So what we're actually doing is we're calling a function that we made called isTrue. Now let me show you what that does. If we scroll down here, I created a little sub function, and this method takes a string, right? It takes the string value that would be that uppercase true or uppercase false, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to say if that string, and then we use this little JavaScript function called toLowercase. So what that does is it takes our uppercase string, which in this case, like I said, is going to be true in all caps, because that's the way that Google Sheets stores it. We're going to take that and turn it into a lowercase, which means true. And if it is lowercase equal to true, then we're going to return true and put a little semicolon on that. And so basically what we do is for every single one of these skill proficiencies, we take the value from the spreadsheet, which is that all caps true or false. We run it through this IsTrue checker. And what that does is down here, we convert it to lowercase and we see, is it true or is it false? And if it's true, we return true. Otherwise, we don't have to worry about it because it's going to return false. So if it's true, we're going to return true and have that checked value applied. It's a bit of a hacky workaround because there's no way for us to know whether something is true in the sheet because it's stored as an uppercase string instead of a lowercase true value. So we're going to do that for each skill proficiency, right? And like I said, we don't actually have to store our skill values because they're automatically calculated in the sheet anyway. So it means less data that we have to pull from the spreadsheet. All we're doing with this function is we're checking to see which skills we're proficient in according to the database, and then changing the checkboxes on our sheet. And once the checkboxes are changed, then we just call our SetSkills function. And like I said, whenever we're doing that for loop, we're just going to add that return to the end and, make sure that we stop processing. So once we've done that, we can set our skills. Now, that one is a little further down here because we don't end up calling it from our LoadCharacter function. So let me open that up and show you what we're doing in our SetSkills function. This is actually, we don't even have to call data from the spreadsheet. All of the data here is stored on the sheet that we're looking at, and that allows us to call that function whether or not we need to reference data from the database. So we call it from up here, and we call it every time we update our modifiers, right? And all it does is it gets our modifiers. It parses int, which that's another JavaScript built-in function there. And all that does is it takes the string value, just in case there's a string value in here. There shouldn't be because it's always a number, but it takes that number and makes sure that it's an integer. So it takes that number and makes it something that we can do some math with, which is, just kind of a fallback emergency, make sure that we don't accidentally cause something that breaks our sheet. And we double check if document.getElementById acro proficiency. So for each skill proficiency, we check if the checked value is true. And if it's true, then we are going to first set the value of that checkbox to true. Now, this is important because when we save our data, remember I said how the Google Sheet saves the data differently from the JavaScript version of that Boolean, right? So we need to make sure that we store that value as true and not just the checked property as true. So that way, this is important for when we go to save our data. So just like we take the value from the spreadsheet and we run it through that if true function, what we're doing is we're taking the value so that when we publish our form and we save it to the spreadsheet can interpret the data correctly. So we have to add this little bit where we add in the value equal to true. And then if we are proficient in said skill, then we set the value of our acro score, that's our skill score, to our DexMod plus proficiency bonus. If this is not checked, as is the case right now, then we make sure that we do the same thing. We set the value of the proficiency to false, and then we set the score equal to just a flat dexterity mod instead of the dexterity mod plus proficiency. So there you go. And we do that for each skill. If our animal handling is If we're proficient, then we set the value of animal handling to true, and then we calculate the score equal to wisdom modifier plus proficiency bonus. This is where you're going to want to reference a player's handbook to make sure that you get the correct ability modifier for each skill. And then you're just going to copy and paste it 18 times. True, true, false, false, true, true, false, false, true, true, false, false, and so on and so forth. And again, we have to call this whether we're updating our modifiers, whether we're updating our proficiencies, or whether we're loading our character from the database. So we might as well keep that as a function that is isolated from any of those other things in case we need to call it when we need it. Okay, so moving on down the line, the next thing that we call after updating our skill proficiency is updating our HP. And that is up here in our LoadCharacter function as well. So we're going to update our HP, and you're probably going to say that this is starting to look very familiar. We set a variable equal to our selected character. So our selected character name, the document.getElementById character select value, and then we cycle through our database. So for each row, we're going to check and see if the row character name is equal to our selected character. And if it is, then we are going to set our document.getElementById max HP value. That's this one right here. Set that equal to the max HP value that we have stored in our spreadsheet. So right here. And again, because of how awesome PapaParse is, all you have to do is say characterData I max HP. Boom. And then same thing for our current HP. We're going to document.getElementById, get our current HP, which is this one, the smaller number. Well, sometimes it can be a smaller number, right? And then we are going to get that from this column, which is the header HP. And that is the UpdateHP function. Once we've done that, obviously we go down the line and say update our HitDice. And again, this is going to start to look very boring. We call that function UpdateHitDice. Set a variable selected character equal to document.getElementById character select. That's the name that's in the character select value. And then we're going to loop through our spreadsheet, see if we find that character name, set our HitDice and our HitDie equal to these guys. So for our HitDice value, that's how many dice we have remaining. So when we look at our spreadsheet, it's HitDice. And then our HitDie is the type of die based on the class. So you know how fighters get like a D12 or a D10, I believe. Actually, it's barbarians get a D12. We populate that dropdown based on that. And not only do we have the options as built-in options in our HTML, but because we have everything set up in a Google Sheet, we can actually set up some data validation to set some specific HitDice values over here as well. And again, when we get to the setting up Google Sheet phase, I'll show you how to do that using a second tab where we've got our validations here. All right. Up next, we have our LoadGear. We are going to do the same thing that we've been doing, which is set our variable for selected character. Now, I mean, if you want to, you can set this to a global variable, but the reason that I didn't is because in case anything changes, in case the character name changes or something like that, you don't want to be pulling from an old name value, right? So it's just a fallback to make sure we always declare that variable at the beginning of each of these functions. It's not very efficient, mind you, but again, you don't want to accidentally pull data from the wrong character. So, like I said, you might be getting bored seeing this variable declaration at the beginning of every function, but the reason I'm doing it is to prevent calling data that is not relevant anymore. And then as with everything else, we're going to loop through that spreadsheet and we're going to look for our match of selected character. And then from there, we are going to set the document.getElementById equipped armor, set the value equal to whatever our armor value is in the spreadsheet, which again, we have that saved right here. Is our armor and shield values. And again, because we're using some validation, we can actually set these up accordingly. Now, Something interesting here that I need to point out is you notice that these are all lowercase. The reason I did that, the reason that this is set up the way it is because we're comparing the value of these, not the inner HTML. So when we built this sheet originally, in our function, each of these options has a value that is the lowercase version of, and lowercase and one word, right? So we want to make sure that they're as simple to read for a computer as possible. So we set our value equal to chainmail instead of chain space mail. So that means that in our spreadsheet, we need to make sure that these are saved as values instead of the inner HTML. So instead of putting in something like, chain mail, which, as you can see, we have a data validation error that is going to prevent us from screwing things up, over on the character sheet side. But, over here, that would not be able to calculate our AC because we need a value of chainmail. Just make sure that you keep things consistent between your character sheet and your spreadsheet. And then we are going to set that equipped armor value to our armor, and we're going to set our equipped shield value to our shield. So either none or shield, as you can see in our dropdown, none or shield. So once the LoadGear function is done, we are going to call that update armor class, which, theoretically we could just add that to the end of the LoadGear. Again, we're keeping things separate. We don't want to call every single function every time we do a minor change, right? We just want to call them when we need them. So over here in our update armor class function, I mentioned before that we combined our update armor and our update shield functions from previous editions of this character sheet. So what we do is we set our armor equal to the equipped armor value, and then we loop through the different armor values that we have. So padded, leather, studded. We do get to a point where if our armor value is hide, for instance, remember in D&D we have max evasion bonuses or max dexterity modifiers that we can add to that, right? So we can't exceed a certain value when we use heavier armor, right? We have a temp armor variable that we set equal to our dex mod plus 12, right? And if it's higher than 14, then we just lower it down to 14. Otherwise, we set it equal to the temporary armor value. So basically what we're saying is if the armor value is hide, which has a 12, and the dex mod, let's say, for instance, we have 12 dexterity, meaning we get a +1. So that would make our temporary armor 13. If 13 is greater than 14, then we set it to 14. Because it's not, we set our final armor class equal to 13. So what this does is it restricts the maximum dexterity mod bonus you can get based on that armor. So, if you're wearing heavy plate armor, you don't get, +6 dexterity. So all of that, again, is the same that we used to have in the old sheet. All we did is we added a little bit at the end here where we say if document.getElementById equipped shield, that's this one. If shield is equal to shield, then we get our armor class value and we add +2 to that. Otherwise, we just set it to our armor class. Again, that's a function that was already in place in the previous version of this character sheet. It's just this version takes the two different functions and combines them into one. And that is everything that we do when we load our character. Now, as you can see, we've got a lot of other things going on here, right? So we've got our TakeDamage script. This is the same as it was before. We are just going to take whatever the value is in here, subtract it from our current hit points. First, we check to see if the current hit points minus the amount that we deal is greater or equal to 0, then we deal that. If it's greater than 0, then we don't want to go into negative hit points. So we set it to equal 0. In the HealHP function below that, that's what happens when we click on our heal button. We're going to take that modifier value, that's the input, variable amount equals We're going to parse integer. That's that built-in JavaScript function that gets an integer out of a script, or out of a string, sorry. And we are going to say get element by ID, the HP modifier value. And what we're going to do is say if current HP plus the amount is less than or equal to max HP. Let's expand that part. Then we set our current HP value to the current HP plus the amount. If it's greater than max HP, then we just set it to max HP. And what that does is it prevents us from being able to have higher hit points than our max. If we wanted to heal 10 points, it's just going to max us out. And similarly, like I mentioned before, if we damage, we can't damage below 0. And again, those functions are identical to the older version of the spreadsheet, as are our LongRest, which LongRest, again, is just a container for other functions, which is reset HP, which all that does is it literally just sets our current HP value equal to our max HP value. And then our reset hit dice, which takes our hit dice value and sets it equal to our player level, which would be your max hit dice. So LongRest just resets the HP and hit dice to their maximums. ShortRest, as you know, does a little bit different, right? Because it subtracts a hit die and then it adds some HP based on some random math that we generated. Again, I'm not going to go through this particular portion because it's not relevant to the functionality that we're adding. All right, so in our SaveData function, this basically just submits our character sheet. So what we do is we set up a variable called formData, and we're going to set that equal to new formData. And inside that parentheses, we're going to say document.getElementById character sheet. Remember how I said at the beginning, we want to set our form ID equal to something that we can call. So what we're doing is we're taking our form ID of character sheet and we're getting the form data out of that. Now from there, we're going to do a fetch request. That's what this is, right? So we say fetch, and then in parentheses, you see I've got this big, long, fancy URL that we are going to create here in just a moment. What we're doing is we're using a Google Apps script in order to access our character database in Google Sheets. And then we are going to do a method post, which means we're going to post that form data, and the body of the post is going to be the variable form data that we just created. Now, this part doesn't make sense yet because we haven't gotten into that fun stuff. So let's hop back over into our Google Spreadsheet, and this is where we're going to set things up so that we can save them, load them, and have all of that good stuff that we've been talking about so far. Okay, so now before we get into the Google Apps script portion, in case you are interested in setting up this kind of data validation for your hit dice, for your armor, and for your skill proficiencies, and remember, that's all we're storing in here. We don't have any modifiers, we don't have any of their skill values. We only save as much as we need to in this character database so that we can minimize the amount of data that we have to process every time we save and load. So what we did is I created a second sheet down here and we called it validation, right? Now remember, you want to keep these names something that you can remember. I set the first sheet equal to characters and I set the second sheet equal to validation. Remember that name because it's going to come into play later, all right? So under validation, you see I've created some columns here, right? We've got our hit dice, we've got our armor, and we've got our shield. These are the three validation columns that we are using to make sure that we can only set these values equal to particular numbers. So when you click on a cell like this, or you can select a range of cells if you want for that matter, you click on data up here in our Google Sheet. And we go down to data validation. What we do is we have our cell range, and then in our criteria, we want to be able to call it from a specific range of cells. We can click this button, which allows us to navigate to our validation page. We can just select this column. We click OK, show dropdown list in the cell. Now we don't want to reject the input. We'll just have a show warning that way. We can still enter incorrect values, but it's going to add that little red flag whenever we try to put something in there that is not in this list. and we hit save, and then we hop back over into characters. And let's say I try to set my HitDice equal to 5. It's going to give me that little red flag that says it has to fall within the specified range. This can be super helpful if you want to limit the amount of data editing that can happen on the spreadsheet side. When we talk about saving data to our spreadsheet, what you're going to want to do is from your spreadsheet, we're going to click the Extensions tab, and we're going to go down here to App Script. Now, if you've never seen this is like a Google Dev console, right? And this allows us to run various scripts. So this is a combination of scripts that I've kind of pilfered from throughout the internet. I'm not an expert in app script by any stretch of the imagination, and it took a little bit of help from the awesome folks over at Stack Overflow in order to get the loop to work correctly for this. So big shout out to those guys for helping this project come to life, right? I'll put a link down in the description to the GitHub where I downloaded the basic form here, and you can copy and paste out of that one, or you can, copy and paste what I paste down there. I'll make this part available as well, since it's not going to be embedded in the code pen, right? So just for the sake of example, I've created an untitled spreadsheet here. It's blank. There's nothing here, except for sheet 1, right? So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go extensions, apps script, and we're going to load a new app script. So this is what happens when you open app script for the first time. You get untitled project and you get a code.google scripts that has just a blank function. We're just going to take that, delete it, and paste in the function that we had over on the Dungeons and Dragons character sheet spreadsheet, right? And then we're going to hit save project. Once you've done that, you see that you have now the ability to run our initial setup. Now, this isn't going to work because I don't have the spreadsheet set up the way that I have the character sheet spreadsheet set up. But what we're going to do is run the initial setup just so that you can see how it asks for your permissions here. So we hit run on initial setup. It's thinking about it. This is what's going to happen. You're going to get authorizations required. You hit review permissions, and it's going to do this little pop-up. You're going to click your name from the Google list here. And what's going to happen is you're going to get this Google hasn't verified the app. Well, that's because you're not a Google developer, right? So you go to advanced here and you continue to untitled continue to whatever your project name is, and it's unsafe, right? Well, it is safe because, we're doing it here together. It's going to ask for permission to access your Google account, and all it needs to do is access your Google Sheets and spreadsheets. And we're just going to hit allow. And there you go. That is how you give this script permission to run on your Google spreadsheet, right? I can't do it on the existing one because I already gave it permission when I set up the sheet to begin with. All right, now that we've got that initial setup out of the way, let's go through our function here that we're going to be calling, which is function doPost, and we're going to pass a parameter of e through that, okay? Now, these first two lines, they're not super necessary, but they are part of the GitHub that I link to below. And what it does is it sets up a lock that locks this script from being called multiple times within a certain amount of time. And this is an absurd amount of time because you're going to see later, if you click on the execution log up here, it takes maybe 1.2 seconds for this entire script to finish running. So it's going to be a very rare scenario, but basically it just prevents you from having multiple data sources trying to access the spreadsheet at the same time. So while it is locked, this is where this try function comes into play, right? What we're going to do is we're going to open our spreadsheet app by ID. That's what we set up on our initial setup here. So once you have given access to the script to access your Google spreadsheets, it's just setting it up so that, okay, now you can access this particular set of spreadsheets. So what we're going to do is we're going to get our sheet by sheet name from that document. That's where sheet name becomes important. So we have it set equal to characters. Normally it's defaults to sheet 1 or something like that, but that's why you need a case sensitive value down here in your sheets, and you need to make sure that that is input up here in your sheet name variable. So from there, we've loaded up our sheet variable, and we're going to get the headers of that spreadsheet, right? we've got variable headers, and we set that equal to the sheet. So that's the spreadsheet. And then there's a built-in script called getRange. And getRange takes in several values. Basically, it's just cell values. So it's cell 1, which is this one right here. And then there's another function that we're calling that is 1 and then get last column. So we've got one row that we want to get, and then we want to get the last column. So what that script does is it just gets the last column of data in your spreadsheet where there's a value. If there was a blank one over here, it would only go all the way up to AG. That makes the script very flexible, because if we want to add more data that we want to save, like say, for instance, we had spell lists and things like that, we can keep adding columns to save for each character, and we don't have to change the app's script anymore. And then we're going to get the values of that row, which is our header row. So all we're doing here is we're setting up our headers, and that makes it so that we can access data. Then we're going to set up a variable called next row. And what we're doing here is we're going to get the last row, which again is another built-in script for AppScript. And it gets the last row that has data in it. In this case, that's row 6. And it adds +1 to that. So what we're doing is we're saying the next row is going to be 7. And that's where we would input our data if we were creating a new character. Below that, we have a variable new row. Then this function here maps the headers. We just set that up, our header row, maps it to the matching values from our sheet. So remember back when I said that you need to set the attributes to something that you remember, something that matches over here in the spreadsheet? That allows us to map the data that's coming in from this form to our spreadsheet. So, we've got input name equals player name, player name. We've got name equals character name, character name. That is how we map the inputs that we're getting from our form, and we put them in the correct column over here. So then from there on, we go to set up our for loop that's going to see if we have any matches. So we're going to say variable range, and we're going to say sheet data range. All this does is it selects all of our rows and columns that have data in them. And then we're going to say variable range data right here is equal to our range, which is all of the cells that have data in them. And then we're going to run this script that says get values. That gets the actual data that's in the cell. And so what we've done is we've created an array of all of the values in the entire sheet that we can use to compare to the values that we have in our HTML form. By now, you're probably sick of seeing these for loops, but we're going to run another for loop. And we're going to say for variable I, it's the same thing as it is in JavaScript. I equals 0, semicolon, as long as I is less than the range data, that's this right here. As long as it's less than the number of rows that we've got, we're going to run through this script. And so what we say is if range data I, which is our row, and then 0, which is our indexed column, right? That's going to be this right here. If range data I, which is the variable of the row, and the index is 0, which is the first column, is equal to E, which is our sheet data. Remember, that's what we're passing through up here, is do post E dot parameter. That's how we access the name value of our data from the form, and say dot player name. So that's how we access this right here. What we're doing is we're comparing the player name to the first column. So if that is a match, then we've got our double ampersands here. What that means is and. So we need both of these conditions to be true in order to do this part of the script, right? So that means if the first column is equal to the player name, and then we've got range data I1, which is range data I is the row, and then 1 is your index, comparing the values from this column to E.parameter character name. So we're getting our form data and our character name. So whatever we input down here, we're going to compare this value to this value. And if we have a match, then we're going to change the value of our next row. If our next row would be, this one, right? So if we have a match that's the player name is Steven, the character name is Ethan, then this is the row that we want to map our data to instead of adding a new row. Then what we're going to do is remember that these are all offset by 1 because this is technically row 0 because we set I equal to 0. So we have to take I and add 1 to it. So we're going to say, instead of our next row being the last row plus 1, we're going to say our next row equals I plus 1. And that sets our next row variable equal to the row that we're trying to overwrite. And then we want to break our for loop, because if we keep going through the loop, then, if we've already found a match and then we get down to the bottom, it's no longer a match, right? So we need to break that for loop. And once we've done that, this little line here, sheet, which, as you know, is our variable that has the spreadsheet in it, get range, which is next row, that sets the next row equal to whatever we declared our next row to be, set it equal to its length. So, we can make that variable. Like I said, we can add more columns and not have to worry about going back and editing this script. But then what we're going to do is set our values equal to the new row that we set up back here where we mapped our headers. And so what that does is whatever our next row is, we're going to populate it according to the header values, which are going to be equal to the form names that we set up before. And then we've got a few debug options here. And then finally, once we're done, we release the lock. And that allows more data to be posted later. Okay, so by now you're probably wondering, how do we call this script from this character sheet? Now, remember I said that there's that SaveData function, and we have this big fancy URL that we need to paste in here. Let me show you how we set up this URL so that we can get our post. First, before we go to deploy, which is going to give us the URL we need to come over here and set up a trigger. So click on triggers after you've saved. And you see here I've got a trigger already set up. I'm going to just go ahead and edit it. But if you need to, there's an add trigger button. If you don't have any triggers set up, it'll be right here in the middle and you just click add trigger. So I'm going to edit it to show you what exactly we're doing. So here we choose from the drop down which function we would like to run. In this case, we're going to say do post, which, as you remember, it's do post, and then we pass that E variable through it. We want it to run at deployment head. And then from the event source, we're going to do from spreadsheet. And then on event type, we want to do on form submit. And then you don't have to put anything in here in particularly, but if you want to, you can have some failure notification settings. Save it up. And there you go. We hop back into our editor view, and then we hit deploy. And what you're going to do is hit new deployment. From this new deployment, you want to give this name something descriptive. So we can call it like add/update_character. And then from the execute as, you want to select me, which, I've redacted my email address for obvious reasons. And then when you say who has access, you want to change it from only myself or anyone to Google account to anyone. That's going to allow you to run this web app from anywhere as anyone. And then click deploy. Once you've got your deployment, you come down here to your web app URL. Go ahead and click copy. Close that out. And then you're going to paste that URL right here in our SaveData function. And that is how you access the apps script function from your JavaScript over here on the character creation side. And once we've done that, we can create a new player, we can create a new character, and let's just go ahead and save data for posterity's sake. And there we go. We have our new character created with some missing values, obviously, because we did not populate all of that stuff just yet. So pretty awesome and pretty powerful stuff here. You have access to pull data from your Google Sheet using PapaParse, and you have access to post data to your Google Sheet using apps script. Okay, so hopefully this overview has been helpful for you, going over all of the new functionality that we've incorporated into our sheet. From now on, we will be able to load and save characters to a Google spreadsheet using PapaParse and the Google Apps script functionality in order to post and fetch data from our character sheet, which is a very powerful thing. And now everything that we add going forward is, posting and fetching that data. If you have any questions or if I breezed over something too fast, let me know down in the comments below and I will definitely elaborate on that part of the script. Give this video a thumbs up if you like this kind of content and you want me to continue sharing all of the tips and tricks that I'm learning with programming and how I can implement that stuff into tabletop role-playing games and video games and such. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will catch you later.